Hi everyone, my name's Stacey and welcome to Quilt Club. This is week 3 and this week we will be basting our quilt, and what that means is we take our quilt top, the batting and the backing and we sandwich them together and we secure them so that it's ready for quilting. So the first thing we need to do is get our backing prepared. You may have chosen to use 100% quilting cotton and you'll have 3.5 yards, or you may be using an old sheet that you had lying around, and I'll show you how to prepare both of them. So I'm going to start off with my quilting cotton. You should have 3.5 yards. So I'm just going to open it out and I want to fold it in half. I'm keeping the manufacturer's fold in there. So if this is a whole big 3.5 yard piece, I just want to take the two ends and join it together to find the middle so I can cut it in half. So I'll just line up the folds and come all the way to find the middle. And then I'm just going to have the folds facing me, which remember we always do. I'm just going to line it up on a line, or you could use your ruler. And I'm just going to cut the very edge off, catching the fold so that it's in two pieces so we can sew it together. Okay, so I just want to cut this very end off where the fold is, so I've got it in two pieces, and then I'm going to sew it together. So I'm going to lining mine up with the 30 on either end. I'm lining up my ruler, top, bottom, double checking, triple checking, hand firm on, pinky off, cutter on. Doesn't have to be perfect because this is a rough end. We're not going to use it as part of our quilt. Okay, so we've got our two pieces of quilting cotton here, and what we're going to do is we're going to sew the two pieces together with the salvages together. So it's very hard to cut a straight line when the fabric is so big, so what we're going to do is sew it first, and you can choose to iron it open and leave your salvages, or if you don't like the salvages there, we can use the sewing line as the guide to cut them off, but that's up to you. What we do need to make sure is that we've swapped our foot, and I'm using a regular foot now because we're not using our 1/4 inch. We need quite a wide space from our edge of our fabric to our stitching, so we've got room to either cut that salvage off or room so we're not going to see these funny little dots. So what you need to do is take a look at your sewing machine and work out what line you're going to use to line your fabric up against. So I've chosen to use the 1, which is 1 inch, and it happens to be the edge of my masking tape, which is quite handy. So if I sew here at the 1, it's the one there, it's all the way down and on to the edge of my masking tape, my needle will go down here. Can you see how I'm a long way off from the salvage? And that's what I need. I need a lot of clearance, so I'm not going to get these little dots in my backing, and also if I want to cut those salvages off when we're finished. So what we're going to do is we're going to take one side of the fabric, one of the salvages, because we've got salvages on either side, and then we're going to take the other piece of fabric and find the salvage we're going to use on that side. Now I'm using plain white cotton, and I don't believe there is a good or a bad side, but you might have a pattern fabric, so you need to make sure you're sewing your good sides together. So I'm going to line them up, my two salvages together all the way along, and then we're going to pin them and sew them. And this can be a little bit fiddly because it's quite a big bit of fabric. So give it a bit of a shake out and loosely match them up, and then come back to the beginning or the end and line up those salvages. And we're just going to put some pins in. And we'll do that all the way along. Okay, all the way to the bottom or the top. We'll use that as our top now. and then we'll sew those together. So I'm going to change that to stitch length 2 just so it's nice and compact. I'm going to line it up with the 1 because that's what I worked out will be the best for me. You work out what will be the best for you. I'm going to put my foot down. We don't need to go backwards and forwards because we're probably not using this end or the other end for our actual quilt. We're just trying to get one big nice piece of fabric for our backing. So I'll begin sewing. Okay, you might have noticed that I was moving the fabric as I was going. It's quite a big bit of fabric, so just maneuver it as you need to make it easier for yourself. Take out that last pin. Okay, so now we've sewn that. Okay, so I've got my two pieces of fabric that I sewed together here. I've got my selvages here, my stitching is here, and I've just smoothed it out on my mat. And like I said before, the piece is too big to get a really beautiful, perfect cut to then sew. So we're doing it the other way around, which is a little bit of a sneaky trick. But what we're going to do is we're going to find the stitching and we're going to use that as our guide to cut. So what we do is we pop our ruler on top and we decide where we want to cut it from. Now, I do like to make it a little bit generous. I don't generally like a 1/4 inch seam allowance on my backing, so I'm just going to go with 1/2 inch, and we sewed it at 1 inch, which means I'll get rid of most of my selvages. Okay, so now I'm using the lines in the ruler and I'm just lining them up with the stitching. So I'm going to come up past where the stitching ends, and I'm just finding the stitching and lining it up with 1/2 inch. Now you don't have to do this. If the selvages don't bother you, just leave them there, but if you do want to cut them off, this is what you do. So I'm lining up 1/2 inch on my ruler all the way along on my stitching, and it's quite long. I'm going to have to do this in 3 goes, so I'm going to cut one line and then move it up and then continue on. And it doesn't matter if it's not perfectly straight because we're not going to see this. This is going to be ironed open and be a seam. And then we'll just move the fabric up. And then we'll just line our ruler up on the 1/2 inch again. So I'm getting 1/2 inch and my line is sitting right on top of my stitches. And if your stitches are a little bit crooked, you'll see that now. Don't worry too much. Ironing does seem to cure a lot of mistakes. And then we'll just move that up again. I'm going to have to do it in 4 goes, sorry. So lining up my ruler on top of my stitches. Remembering you don't have to do this if you don't want to. If the selvages don't bother you, leave them there and just iron it open. Just moving it up to get that last little bit off. Okay, so now I've cut my selvages off. But once again, you don't have to do that if you don't want to. And I haven't actually got the complete selvage off, but I've definitely got the very edge off. Okay, so now we're going to iron. I'm going to press the seams, and I'm just going to set the seams because I do want it to sit nice and flat. It's not necessary for a backing, but if you'd like to be pedantic, you can also set your seams. So this is optional. now we want to open it out, and I'm going to iron my seams open. You might choose to iron your seams to one side, but I like my seams open on the backing. So I'm just going to finger press them open and give them a press. And do that all the way along. So we're coming right to the end now. So just remembering, we're pressing these seams open, and you could be using starch now. You might not want to use steam. You might want to use a spray water bottle. Do whatever you've decided works best for you. Once you've pressed those seams open, I want you to give the whole piece a good iron. So we're giving the whole piece a good iron. Now these folds here from the manufacturers, you might find them hard to get out. You might want to spray a bit of water on them. You might want to use a bit of starch, but remembering, just try your best. They'll come out when you wash your quilt for the first time. Okay, so when it comes to sheets, I'm never too worried about wasting any fabric, because unless I've got more sheets identical, I'm not going to reuse them to make a quilt. Whereas when I'm using my quilting cotton, I'm always very careful because I know I can save it and use it for other quilts in the future. So what we need to do is basically cut a square that's going to be bigger than our quilt top, preferably 3 inches on either side. So let's open this up. It doesn't have to be perfect because we'll be fixing it when we trim our quilt off. So I'm just going to find the middle there of my big sheet, and it's folded, so I know that if I cut that on, let's say 33, it's going to be 66 inches wide, which is more than enough. So I'm just going to roughly cut that because I don't have to worry about it being perfect. So we're just roughly doing it. It's folded here. I've got 4 layers. The fold is also up here, and I'm going to cut it at 33, and I'm going to be careful not to come past my mat. It doesn't have to be straight because we've got a lot of room to move if we make mistakes. And I'm just going to check where my mat starts, and it starts about here. And I'm just going to go up just to roughly cut it. So now I've got that one cut. I'm just going to bring it up, and I'm going to repeat that until I've got a nice straight cut. So now I've got rid of that side. So now I know that it's going to be roughly 66 inches wide, and then I need to do the same on the other side because our quilt's square. So I'm just cutting this really roughly, guys, because we've got heaps of clearance on all sides, so it doesn't matter if it's a bit crooked. I'm just going to line up my folds on this end, and I'm just going to cut it again at 33 inches. And now I know I've got a pretty rough 66-inch square piece of sheet for my backing. So I've just got my sheet, and I just want to give that a good iron. And again, you might want to use steam, you might want to use starch, you might want to use a spray bottle, but just do whatever's best for you. Okay, and I would like you to give your quilt top one nice last iron over the whole top. and then you can flip it over and check the back as well. So just give the back a quick iron, just check that all the seams are nice, sitting nicely. Like this one's turned up a bit, I'm just going to press that down so it's going to sit nice and flat when we quilt. And another thing to quickly check is if you've used coloured thread and perhaps it's going to lie on a light piece of fabric here, just give them a trim so they don't show when the quilt is quilted. Okay everyone, so now you've prepared your backing and given it a good iron. You've given your quilt top a good iron. Now it's time to watch the next video and baste the layers together.